Thank you so much for joining us. It's not every day you get to interview an astronaut and an astrophysicist, so I'm extremely thrilled and flattered to be here. My name is Sarah. I head up campus over in Old Street, which is a space for entrepreneurs, and I'm also the chair of Women At, and this event is one of the last events we're holding. You know, we hold talks at Google very often, but our theme this year for International Women's Day was Press for Progress. And you can interpret that in many ways. We choose to think of it as influencing inclusive culture, but also thinking about how we can live better lives. And I think we'd all agree that space and the promise it has is a massive part of that. So I'm really thrilled to welcome our two wonderful guests. They have really impressive biographies, so forgive me for looking at my paper at the same time. First things first, Claudie Haigneré, a French doctor, politician and former astronaut with the Centre National d'Études Spatiales and the European Space Agency. You studied medicine, biology, sports medicine, aviation, space medicine, rheumatology. You've also got a PhD in neuroscience, incredible academic background. You were a backup crew member for the 1993 Mir Altair mission, and in 2001 became the first European woman to visit the ISS. Following your career as an astronaut, you entered French politics as the Minister for Research and New Technologies, and you're a commander of the Legion of Honor. So welcome, Claudie. And Ersilia Valdo is an astrophysicist who's been working at the European Space Agency since 1991. She's currently Chief Diversity Officer. During her career at the ESA, she's held several positions, including elaboration of high-level strategy, formulation of policies, international relations, strategic analysis, relations with member states, and networks with think tanks. She has a specialization in astrophysics and a further education in economics. So welcome, Ersilia. So Claudie, like many of us in the audience, I grew up dreaming of going into space. And you have this incredible academic record. What made you, after getting a PhD in neuroscience, what made you become an astronaut? What was the original idea behind it?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be with you today. It's not really the story from the PhD in neuroscience to become an astronaut. I will begin with the fact that I was 12 in July '69. For the first human landing on the moon. And it was really for me something incredible to have this dream inaccessible becoming a reality. And at that time, it was for me something that fed my imagination. I read a lot of documentaries, science fiction books and everything. And as there is no astronaut school, it's not a curriculum that you can enter like that. So I decided to become a medical doctor. I'm a rheumatologist, and I had this chance in the hospital where I was working in Paris to discover an opportunity from the French agency to become an astronaut and taking part in the scientific programs in the space station. So for me it was clear, it was for me, and I tried it and I asked for a file and I put my candidature and go through the selection, and I've been selected. It was in '85. And maybe it's something that I can share more with the girls than with the boys. I decided that having been selected as a scientific astronaut, okay, I had a doctorate, I was an MD, I did clinical research, but I wanted to be sure that I will have all the right assets to be on the path in between astronaut candidates to astronaut assigned to a mission. So I decided to do a PhD in order to work in a laboratory and to have really this basic training as a scientist. And so I would say that it's maybe a kind of a lack of confidence that it was needed for me to have more than just the first background in order to ensure that I will get all the assets to be on the path. Yeah. And it was wonderful to work in this laboratory for neuroscience because I chose the right laboratory in order to be in the team cooperating on space program in microgravity, functioning of the body, working with NASA, with JAXA, the Japanese agency, or the Russian agency. So that meant it was one element to be sure to be somewhere on the right path after that. And it was obvious for me that I had to try it.
Yeah.
This. And as I said, after that, a long time training, because I've been selected in 85 and my first flight was in 96. So a long training in order to become not just a scientist, but also an engineer. My first flight was as a scientist, astronaut, and my second flight as a board engineer, that means in charge of everything, maintenance, and, of the station and the vehicle. So a long period of training and great impatience to be the day in August 96, waiting for the zажигание. That means the beginning of the adventure. And really the adventure, the reality was even more wonderful than the dream I had in mind and my imagination. I'm very lucky.
I have to ask you more about the reality. I mean, I'm you know, a 10-year training period to me is staggering. Can you tell us more about, like, is there a particular moment that for you was simply unforgettable about your first trip into space? Just a moment that made you think, wow, this was worth this 10-year journey?
Yeah, I can say that wow at this time, but I would like also to say that with the time, as I explained, I lived for 10 years in Russia because my 2 flights were with their Soyuz system. And that means there is a very wow moment during the flight, but there is also a wow moment with this period of life in Star City in Russia. I went there in 92, just at the beginning of the Russian period after the Soviet Union, and I saw all the transformation, and this was also a cultural shock, and it was something really impressive, and that means that we have wonderful and unexpected moments for the mission, but I had short mission, space mission, but there is also this incredible human adventure that I lived for 10 years with my colleagues, with different culture, diversity of gender, diversity of backgrounds, with military pilots as well as scientists and even tourists, space tourists at the time. So that means all the landscape was there, the spectrum. So, and for the flight, what can I say? As a rheumatologist and as a sport woman, I am a gymnast, I was really impressed with the new abilities I discovered being in free-floating. I can try to share a little bit. You have seen pictures and movies about that, and that's really exciting to see that we have some hidden, I would say, abilities that will be revealed in this new environment. And this is this feeling of freedom, not completely comfortable at the very beginning, because you have to build new reference, new frameworks, and there is this way to reorganize your sensory motor patterns, but also to rebuild some cognitive references. And for example, the first time I looked through the window at this kind of vision that you have on screen, that means Earth was above the cosmos or the sky. So I was not comfortable with that. I had to do around the window in order to put everything on the right direction. And the same to see Africa above Spain, for example. It was not comfortable for me, although I had to actively do cognitive rotation in order to be quiet. So this ability, potential for adaptation of our sensory motor sensors and the way. This is really something incredible. And then the glance through the window. That's true. To have this chance to be in orbit and 400 kilometers from Earth. As you know, one orbit is 90 minutes, so that means 16 times a day we have the possibility to go through, depending of the kind of orbit. If you're in orbit with the Pacific, for example, it will be 50 minutes, water, 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 and nothing to see, but some other. So that's really, we are very privileged. I think we are about 580. Astronauts.
It's a small group.
Just 10% female astronauts.
Wow, I didn't realize it was so small.
10%, that means about 60. And we can discuss that after.
Of course.
10% applicants, candidates That means
interesting.
yes, 10%
there's lots
candidates.
Of astronauts
That means
in this audience,
10%
perhaps.
female astronauts.
Yeah.
So at the entry of the pipe, there is a deficit in
It's really interesting. I really liked your point around we have abilities that will be revealed in space. To me, that sounds wonderfully mystical. And also, you know, from everything we've read about, I think Tim Peake's diaries have helped a lot of us get a stronger picture of what it feels like day to day. How did the two journeys change your thinking when you came back to Earth? Was there anything that felt different? I mean, obviously, we've all seen the story this week about Scott Kelly and his twin. You know, we know very little about that right now, apart from the fact that 7% of his genes are now unidentical to his identical twin. But what, in your thought processes, what felt different when you came back?
So I had short duration missions. The first one was a 16 days mission, and the second one a 10 days mission. So nothing to see with Tim Peake mission, 6 month duration, or Scott Kelly, as you said, 1 year mission. And personally, I've been surprised by the quick readaptation coming back. So in a few seconds, you have to use again your exteroception and proprioception in your skin and sensors in the joints, and also your vestibular apparatus in order to cope with. But in less than 2 minutes, you are okay with that. The first night, it was a little bit strange, because I had the feeling awaked during this night, because my body was heavy, waiting, and all the objects that I had on my body for monitoring my physical state with sensors, everything was floating in the room. So I was always awaking in order to put everything on the same level. So there was a gap in between my personal feeling of coming back and my intellectual, I don't know, cognitive feeling that I was still in microgravity. But so it's not at all the same for long duration mission. As you know, there is this adaptation in microgravity with the muscle relaxed, and that means muscular atrophy and demineralization for the bone structure. So that means it's a little bit a long process to go into the rehabilitation. It's not a question of minutes, it's a question of weeks and months in order to be completely back to yourself. So I've seen already this paper about this difference in the gene sequences, and so that's a challenging question. We know that there is radiation, there is stress that can change something in the gene expression. So we have to wait a little bit to know more. And what is difficult also in this field of microgravity, for example, I have always a question, but what is the difference in the metabolism between the female astronaut and the male astronaut during a long duration flight? And as you know, as researchers, in order to get a certain answer, you need to have some cases, and we have so few cases of female astronauts for long duration flights that it's difficult to say really something. And the same for this potential gene disruption. We know that there is an anomaly after the flight, but the fact that it can
we're lucky he's got a twin, really. Ersilia, you kind of you know, you've been working at the ESA since 1991. Obviously, your background is in astrophysics, but I'd love to learn more about how you came to space as well. Was it a dream of yours when you were a child? I know you've done so many roles in your time at the agency, but how have you seen the agency evolve in that time?
Yes. First of all, I have to say, when I was a teenager, I was very tortured teenager, very much into the poetry, literature, and I really needed something. I wanted to study something that was able to take my center of gravity outside myself and putting distance from myself. I wanted to feel this sense of freedom, even the sense of being nothing in an indifferent, silent universe was for me very empowering. And I have to say, actually something that now in my job as diversity officer, I often say to girls, there is a power of transformations by studying physics in particular, that is forever. And this is because you have you have to abandon your experience to understand, and you enter in a different world. I just give an example. You have, for instance, the helium superfluid. The helium superfluid is a magic thing, and if you go below a certain temperature, he loses the third dimension. It becomes flat. So if you put in a glass, it starts climbing and goes, as a film on a table. Now, looks magic. It's something that you never experience normally, but it's true, it's physics. And the same for what concerns space, and I was actually studying general relativity, and the fact that time feels speed, so change with speed, and change with gravity. So the time that we feel here doesn't go at the same pace than on the space station, and even further. So all these things that looks, again, fiction, are actually other laws of physics that are valuable. And this put me in a dimension of really feeling a sense of power as a human being, a power of being the one that can ask questions and feel curious, and which, by the way, is the message that also Stephen Hawking passed very strongly all through his life, that the ability to ask questions is what makes the difference in this universe. I've been with the European space. Why space? Space because, again, is a natural, if you want, when you have this kind of desire. Actually, desire is a very important word for me. You know, desire, desiderio, comes from the Latin desidera esse, be far from the stars. So
amazing fact.
So I really believe that in each of us there is this tension to reach out to something bigger than us, to something we want to join. We want to join back, and it's a big drive. And I felt this drive. I needed this spiritual dimension, as you said, and in listening to Claudie, this mystic dimension. And so the European Space Agency, also because of its international feature, was really the perfect place to be. I've also spent 4 years in Washington, D.C., working in the relations with NASA, which added up another dimension, so not just the European, but also to see from the other side. And this is what I try now to pass also, the amazement, the wondering of what we discover. We had the gravitational waves just discovered last year. Is a big turning point. We have so many mysteries still to solve, and it's really, this is the sense for me of being a mind and a heart in this vast universe. Yeah.
Oh, I love it. So we were really lucky last year in London. We had an amazing exhibit at the Science Museum about the Russian race for space. Star City was a massive feature of it. I don't know if anybody else went to it. But yeah, it was great, right? And anybody who's my age, Challenger for me was a massive moment of my childhood. I think the first time as a child that I was ever understood disappointment and failure, and that kind of immediate pain. I think a lot of kids followed that really closely. And it kind of struck me at the Russian exhibit that seemed like such a golden age in terms of space. And I'd love to get your thoughts on, obviously with the Scott Kelly story in the last year, we've seen Tim Peake make the most of media. But it feels like a very different era in terms of space and our desire to explore space. Do you think that's fair? Like, what do you think about the shifting politics of space over time?
You can
begin
generally.
Yes. Okay. Generally, I have to say, is a perception. Today we have globally, so on the institutional side, we have more than 70 billions that are funded, that are spent in space activities, civil space activities. We have the double of actors, so well beyond the usual suspects. So now we have about 75 countries that invest more than 10 million in space. So it's really enlarging, and in a way you see that it's not just the economic interest, because actually for these 70 billions spent, you have a downstream activity that is a factor 5 out of that. But there is this, again, this tension, this desire of prestige. In a way, I think that apart from sport, that really makes achievements known to everyone, to humanity. Only space activities can really give this status and this statement. And of course, there is also the fact that the space infrastructure is something that now is part of our daily life. And you know, also in terms of exploration, if you take US, Japan, Russia, Europe, South Korea, India, China, in 5 years' time, we have about 15 missions moon-oriented, similar number Mars-driven, and then the asteroids, the other planets. So there is a big activities. The problem is, of course, what was at that time being really pioneering, but there is still elements of pioneering coming, in particular now also from the private sector. So I think the dynamic is really there. It's not a lost interest. And also astronauts, if we see astronauts, the Twitters and the media coverage,
Oh, yes, for sure. And you have been in the right place to see the way Team Peak communicate with Instagram, Twitter, and it's really interesting to share immediately this adventure. Yes, that's true that there is a new era for space, and you evoked also the private companies that are involved now and are challenging our way to think and to organize. And I have a dream, and this the concept I'm working on in the European Space Agency, this concept about space exploration, human space exploration, to enlarge this concept of exploration to the one of expansion of our humanity on another surface, the moon surface. And I'm working on a moon village concept. That means building a permanent infrastructure with a robotic and then permanent infrastructure where we will live and work and inhabit on that. And that means for me it's an interesting concept because we need to think in terms of new landscape, out of the box, out of the atmosphere, new partners on the international side. You said the International Space Station with 5 partners, and we will have a Chinese space station in a few months from now, but with different interests and different way to cooperate. And we have to think this village, that means live together for the future of humanity in a new environment with private interest, mining, for example, to exploit some resources, tourism, cultural and industries, energy, building new materials, a lot of economical expansion also in terms of economy. An economy in the surrounding of the Earth economy, that means low Earth orbit economy. The space station, for example, we decided to be in this exploitation of the space station with these partners and the public institution until 2024, maybe 2028, and then to begin to think in terms of commercial exploitation of the low Earth orbit. But we have also to think in terms of this expansion and expanding the economical sphere, I would say, for Earth. So that means that's really an interesting concept in order to rethink everything in terms of governance, interfaces, partners that will be part, kind of activities that will be there, the scientific one on the far side of the moon, or a lot of other science that we can do on the moon and from the moon, technological developments, robotics, advanced robotics and interaction with and this is very exciting to try to reconsider in order to be actively involved in changes and not just
passive
passive and receiving the changes by the new actors, the new economics. So I think we need such visions in order to be really active and to design the future we wish.
Yeah, I like that very much. What are the timelines for something like Moon Village? I mean, I think many of us have long been excited by the idea of kind of going into space as a tourist, but I love the idea of building a new world and kind of testing out an infrastructure that is nationless in some ways on the moon. What would be your kind of timelines for a project like that? I mean, I'm guessing this kind of thing is very long term.
I would say it begins already, because there is some probes around the moon. There will be soon new probes from the Chinese side on the far side of the moon, and a sample return, and an Indian one, and a Japanese one. So that means the robotic elements in order to make some maps, defining also where are some resources that we will have to use, because if you are building something on the surface of the moon, you will try to do with the in situ resource utilization. So that means we have to make the map of the possibilities. So this is already on the way. For the first crew, I would say that if really we decided to go in 2030, for me, it's something that can be achievable. We have been already with 6 missions in the Apollo period on the moon, so for sure the techniques have changed, and there is a lot of new element to secure in order to do it. And there is also to secure this sustainability, because I'm speaking not so much in terms of exploration with short period of visits, but living and working on the surface, and that's mean sustainability as well as the economical sustainability as the sustainability for living there. But for the first crew, and I hope a crew with a female astronaut and not just men astronaut, because there was 12 men on the moon. That means yes, 2030, it can be something achievable.
How does I'm going to back up on this piece around no women on the moon, but I want to start with the 2 of the most well-known figures right now in the race for space, Richard Branson, Elon Musk. How does public and private interrelate in this world? I mean, do public figures like that, setting these very audacious goals, does that help this mission if the goal is to raise perception and excitement around space for the next generation of kids to become astronauts?
Sure. I have to say that actually what you bring also from what Claudie was saying is that we are in a moment of many paradigm shifts. So we have, first of all, actually this move from being explorers to start thinking on being also settlers, which is something new. I mean, was not this the project at the time. It was just going there and come back. So there are 2 venues that open up. At the same time, the paradigm shifts actually to have this new, what we call the astropreneurs coming in.
Oh, I love it.
And the astropreneurs coming in actually driven by two things. On one side, of course, the gold rush, as it's called in the US, because you have uncharted territories to discover. At the same time, I mean, there is the infrastructure that is needed for the booming economy of the digital, for the booming market of the digital economy. So there is this attraction from the business, but also the fact that in a way you can't see a race between the billionaires. And even with their project, Elon Musk, with this project of colonizing the solar system with humanities, is one of the most daring and ambitious adventure that in a way we had put on the table. And of course, and the same the project from Branson, from Bezos. So there is really now, sometimes in a provocative way, I say that what was before the race between nations now is a race between these billionaires. But all this is good for space because it changes. They have of course the weight to challenge the institution and to make rules changing. The U.S. under Obama was preparing for this for the condition of having this expansion of the economic sphere to low Earth orbit and entering in on the commercial sectors. So it has brought a dynamic that is a very interesting dynamic and very inspiring dynamic, in particular for the new generations that are very much looking for, with the perspective not of the 60s, but with the perspective of a digital world, of the virtual reality, really to get into this kind of adventure. You know, the program from Musk is very ambitious. He wants to build soon this BFR. You know what it is?
No, what's the BFR stand for?
Is BFR is this? You know.
Oh, okay. I think I've worked it out.
It's a big Falcon rocket.
Big Falcon rocket, exactly. And actually, he has
so
just
many,
announced.
so many symbols in
yes.
space, right?
Yeah. So he has just announced that he plans to, after the successful flight of Falcon 9, the heavy lift, he's planning to have the BFR by 2019, end of 2019, and this should be able to be the vehicle. Because when we talk about exploration, you have always to think about how you get there.
Yeah.
So,
yes.
and so what makes also his plans sensible is that it first starts from how do we go there,
Mobility,
and then what we do there, and the same also. For
and that's why also maybe something I'm convinced that this private landscape is changing, challenging, and it's very useful for the transforming things. Yeah. But we have also, I think, on the public side and institutional side, to keep some safe rules. I would say, for example, for the Moon Village. We will have to think in terms of preservation of something that is a patrimoine de l'humanité, the moon, and the way to work with scientists wanting to do some kind of experiment, and other sides, the mining industries. So we will have to cope and to make the harmony and synergy in between, for example. And then for Mars exploration. I have been in space, I know, and we discussed the fact that there is some changes in genes of Scott Kelly, so we know that there is physiological constraints, that there is radiation difficulties, psychological, speaking about Mars mission. And that means for me, it's not at all clear that we will be ready to go to Mars in 10 or 20 years from now. So that means we need to keep with the understanding that we have for the time being up there. And it's not just a question to access somewhere when we are speaking about human spaceflight, but access, preserving, living, keeping safe, and coming back.
Yeah.
And then
And
for
that's
the
a piece
time being, never
Yeah.
we had a sample return for Mars. That means that we know how to go there, but we don't know how to come back.
Come back.
And that means for me, so I want to keep cool with
Sure.
this kind of a Mars zero with zero return mission. I think ethically and institutionally, I cannot
It's
be
very
in favor
important,
of this kind of thing. So that where I put also this ability to the public policies to be also keeping some safe paradigm.
And think about the European Space Agency. We are 22 member states coming from all over Europe, and Europe is a different. I mean, we have more than 14 languages talk about our member states. We have also Canada as a cooperating state. And then we have, I mean, this international aspect is really a feature of us, and it's I mean, another feature is the fact that we have multi-year funding. So once we agree on something, it's very difficult. We go back. So we're a very interesting international partner also for this aspect of in a way, the fact that we don't change. We have no risk to changing plans every year. But we have been able, putting all these talents together, to do things that a single nation cannot afford. We have been able a few years ago to land a robot on a spinning comet at 400 million kilometers from here. And
the
all
Rosetta
this
mission.
Rosetta. The Rosetta mission that just dropped Philae on the surface of the comet. This was amazing. This was, I would say, almost our man on the moon at that time, because this was completely an achievement that was completely new. And was interesting also the fact that we went there to understand how water came on Earth. And we found water on the comet, on Chury, because too long name. But this water cannot be the water that we have on Earth. and can never become. So these are little pieces of, it's a very, let's say, heavy water, so cannot become the water of oceans. But all these moments that brings together this sense of belonging and the fact that while joining forces you can achieve something is also the strength, and cooperating with the international partner is the strength of the institutional partners. And how really you get the citizens feeling this sense of achieving together something. While on the private sectors the drivers are different, so it's there is an element
There's
of
definitely something around, you know, a Silicon Valley classic tech entrepreneur going into this field, because a lot of the mottos of Silicon Valley are move fast and break things, and that's not something you can really do with space, right? It gets a lot more complicated. So I've got a couple more questions that I'm going to hand over to the audience for your questions, if that's okay. But I'd love to go back to BFR's 10% of astronauts being women. You know, obviously, if this whole mission is about discovering new worlds and inventing new ways of living and exploring the great unknown, it's really important that we represent the world itself really well in that mission. Obviously, Ersilia, you're a Chief Diversity Officer, and you spoke earlier, Claudie, about the pipeline challenge of not enough women applying to become astronauts. I think first things first, I'd love to ask you, for those in the audience who might be thinking, oh, I should become an astronaut, what do you need to apply to become an astronaut? I know that's a silly question. I think probably it's a bit too late for me, but maybe.
No, as I said before, there is very different profiles. You have pilots, engineers in aerospace, or researchers in different fields. I think the main point is to look for the time of a selection. I cannot say today when will be the next selection of the European Space Agency. The last one was in 2008, but I'm sure that there will be another one. Then that's mainly what you said, the desire to have them. Then the commitments to enter in it, so what, and then patience, perseverance and determination, because a long time to go through. And the chance, healthy chance to bear. Because for a selection, for example, the last selection of the European Space Agency, I think there was 8,000 candidates with 10% female candidates, and 6 has been selected. Wow. I'm convinced that there are more than 6 talented persons to bear. So that means there is a part of chance, and we have to organize everything in order to build this chance. But one thing I wanted to underline with the discussion with Ersilia about this attractiveness or deficit of attractiveness for science, engineering careers, I think we have really to think in terms of science and technologies are the 2 pillars in order to cope with the big challenges that we will have in the 21st century, and we'll have, and to find some new solution. But if we try to speak just about the scientific approach, the hard science, the rigor, it's maybe not so attractive for male and female, I would say, but for female, because we need to have a feeling of what we will give, entering, engaging in the way. That means put that in a context, in a sense for the life. And that means we have to take the humanities back in science, engineering, and digital culture can be a good link in between this. Humanities, technology, computing science, but also responsibility about where are we going, human inside. Okay, so we have to think in terms of responsibility, we have to develop something. So for me, what is really needed now, speaking about science, technology, engineering, mathematics, is sort of to put that in culture, in coming back with humanities. I think in the Anglo-Saxon curriculum, it's maybe easier to have this. In France, for example, I don't know in Italy how is it. In France, either you choose
Yeah.
the scientific
in the UK.
field.
You choose.
I would choose the humanities, I would say. And it's difficult to put up there. And I think it's one of the problem in our curriculum. So for me, with the time, I think that's more and more important to have also humanities, thinking, philosophy, sociology. And as Aristotle said a long time ago, he said that there is 3 pillars: episteme, science, research; techne, that means technology, engineering, and phronesis. And phronesis, that's, I would say, the wisdom to act. And I'm sure you're aware of this paper from Mark Prensky about digital wisdom. That means we have also, in this field of the digital culture, that is to keep in mind this phronesis and wisdom. And phronesis will not come strictly from hard sciences and engineering.
How are you thinking about, with that in mind, how are you thinking about that pipeline and kind of getting more girls and women into the application process? And I think there is something around, often, certainly in the startup world, we focus on hard tech roles, whereas I would argue there are many roles that make companies successful, in all companies, including this one. How are you thinking about getting more girls and women into ESA in general?
Yes.
And particularly into astronauts?
We have a paradox in Europe where we have now in almost all countries girls outnumber boys in terms of graduation, so that we have more girls graduating. However, the science field is still a boys' club. We used to say doctors come from Venus and engineers from Mars. Actually, you see the latest graphs. There is really a much higher expectation for boys to get into STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and maths, than for girls. And in the digital world, is even much worse. You are really at level today. Most of Wikipedia is written by men, and there are very few women in digital world. And
it's not the case today.
Some, but
well, and actually, this is our technical office too. So this is very,
Well,
exactly. But there is, and we know today from, there are many things that influence this, and one of the things is also related to stereotypes. And the way also the context brings expectation with respect to the careers of girls and boys. So we are engaging with the whole space sector, actually also industry is engaging to fight these stereotypes, but really to be more vocal about this power of transformation that space can bring. But as Claudie was saying, we are trying also to change the narrative with respect to the STEM, in particular engineering and technology, because we are facing a big revolution. We know the future of work means there will be a polarization of skills. So you will need skills that relates to persuasion, empathy, multiple thinking, and I usually get the provocation saying that it looks that for robot will be easier to replace men than women, given that there is a kind
theory of
the stereotypes. But we want to tell the story of the STEM of the future, not the STEM of today, because engineering today is something, but through the digital, the coming of the digitalization, robotics, and so on, and the new challenges ahead. So with these, the exploration, the settlers, climate change, we need a completely new set of jobs. What we call the bridgers, the orchestrators, and these are the jobs in STEM for tomorrow, and which are also include these aspects of humanities. So not just that thing, but this ability to think at large. And we promoting this, we want really to get a different narrative about what these jobs are, as from is the perception today that these careers are. So we really are investing now in this branding in a way.
And coming back to the profession of astronaut, I would say that's typically a profession where you need to have abilities to go in different fields. I say that there is different background at the beginning, but then you become an engineer, you become a partner in a crew, you become a diplomat, and you think about humanity when looking through the window and about the planet.
Oh, I love it. Final question, then I'm going to hand over to all of you. I always like to end with a fill-in-the-blank question, where I'm going to ask you something, and I'd love a very short answer, please. Space is?
No limits.
Is a perspective.
A book that I always recommend is?
Brief History of Time.
Oh.
Le Petit Prince de Saint-Exupéry.
Oh, I love it. I love that book. The best advice I ever got was?
Never take a no for an answer.
Excuse me.
The best advice I ever got was?
Maybe not an advice, but when is the last time when you did something for the first time? That means always thinking new.
And finally, Googlers can help the European Space Station by?
For me, is by stretching the imagination of what can become possible. Yeah.
Coming back to the Moon Village, by involving involving everyone, young generation, with, I don't know, avatar and things, virtual reality, and how it can help me in involving the young generation in it.
I love it. What's the URL for the Moon Village, by the way? Is there a microsite we can look at with information?
Well, just beginning installing that, so
Okay.
yes, will be soon.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Audience, what would you like to ask? Got one here in the front row. Oh, and I think we've got microphones too because we're recording.
Ladies first. Hi. Добро пожаловать в Google. Hope you liked the Star City for your time there. So, as both the astronaut and the scientist, where do you stand on the question of, do humans actually need to go in space? Is there a place for human space exploration, or will just need to go with robots and telescopes?
Okay. How long do we have? No. I'm sure that you share the fact that human will go further and explore. And it's not the same when you have, I would say, astronaut telling this feeling of body freedom in microgravity, of the look through the window, and so this embodiment, the incarnation of the dream that you have. And humanity will go further and explore. But for me, it's not at all a competition in between the automatic universe, sciences, and this human desire to go further. And I think it's really complementary. When speaking about, for example, Moon Village and this shift in between exploration and expansion for humanity going on another planet, and settlers as well as explorers, it's for me also a way to have an offbeat, I would say, glance and gaze in order to come back to Earth with new solutions, because we will have new problems in this hostile environments. So for me, that's something that is completely synergistic, I would say. And I will not put a priority in because science is science with all the dimension. And as I said, not just the dimension of new knowledge, but also new opportunities. And I think this human spaceflight is also an opportunity that will open new horizons.
This question is for Claudie. You mentioned that looking through the window is all about perspective, and I was wondering if maybe you could share the kind of perspective that gave you.
There is. I was not just thinking in terms of human spaceflight when I say perspective. For me, for example, one of the most powerful conquests of this space race, and beginning in '57 with the first Sputnik in space, is also this ability to have a new gaze on the planet, for example, and the ecological feeling consciousness, I think, is coming from that point. So this is for me also an aspect of new perspective in order to reconsider Earth. New perspective because it's open opportunities and new developments and knowledge for humanity. So that's also a new perspective. And strictly speaking, looking through the window, so you see the planet like that, and you see the beauty of the planet. You have this overview effect. So the beauty of the planet, but also the black cosmos, these mysteries, this, and you put once more humanity and human responsibility vis-a-vis this planet. And it's not so, the very thin layer of atmosphere, that means the fragility of it's also perspective, because when you are on Earth, okay, you have the media saying be careful with this. Here, really, it's even much more than a perspective. That's a fact, and you have it here.
One there.
Hello. I just want to say I'm so happy that you're here, because when I was a kid, I saw you on TV and I was amazed that you would do that, and so this is great. You talked about responsibility and perspective. I'm just wondering, for that moon project, for example, Moon Village, what do you think the actual objective things that we should be doing to protect the moon? And we're talking, you said the atmosphere is very thin. When we're here, we don't really care so much, or not as much as we should. What should we put in place to protect where we are exploring, where we may be settling?
That's what's for me very interesting in this concept of Moon Village, because we will have to have this kind of question on the table in the different step of the building the concept. For sure, there is a technological, I would say, building blocks that we have to put on the table in order to have the right protection for the habitat, for or the way to extract oxygen from the ice on the pole of the moon. So this is one part. Then, if we really consider the concept as working with private companies, with economical interest and scientists, I said, we will have to think in terms of the right cooperation and harmony in between the interests. Then we will have to cope with what I said already. There is a treaty on the United Nations defining the corps céleste, celestial bodies, as and the moon as a patrimoine de l'humanité. That is mean to preserve something as a patrimonial element of the humanity. So we'll have to keep that in mind, for sure. We will have to define also the rules, I would say, for the international governance in different partners, because mainly cooperation in a global project, but also competition in dealing with some elements, and the way to organize the life of the inhabitants of the moon surface. So there is a lot of things to elaborate, to think about, and I would like that to be taken really seriously, progressively, and the technical element is just one part of the project, but all this aspect needs also that we have with us the jurists, the sociologists, the philosophers, architects, because that's a complex architecture to organize. So that's why there's a lot of potential in thinking in that terms. And I said, we have the chance to think out of the atmosphere and not just out of the box. So that's
I love it. I think there was one. Oh, we've just got one over there.
I just wanted to pick up a little bit more on what Sarah mentioned a little bit earlier on about your sense of self. And both of you talked about sense of self in a really interesting way. You mentioned that you wanted to change your center of gravity from a very insular person to something more expansive. And when Sarah mentioned any changes that you'd felt when you came home from space, you spoke in a very anatomical way about changes you'd felt in your body. And I guess I wanted to ask a question of, has a life in space and working in this new world changed your sense of self? Do you now perhaps relate more strongly to something greater than to who you are as a person? Have you felt that you've changed your relationship with yourself as a result of this career path that you've taken?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's difficult to say because there is different elements coming in. The first is relation with you, with people, and the look and the questions that you have. That means it changes the way to communicate, to interfere. This is the first element. After that, I had the chance to have different lives, as it has been said. I have been a medical doctor, I've been an astronaut, I've been a minister, I've been the head of a public establishment, I was closely cooperating with the Science Museum, I was in charge of Palais de la Découverte and Cité des Sciences in France. I'm deeply involved in the innovation. I've been involved for 3 years with theologists about digital challenges with the humanity. So it's been age, different ecosystem, different life. For sure, it's something that is building you, and what's interesting in life also. You are not the same at the beginning, at the end, with the opportunities, meeting the person you will encounter. So I have no really clues to say that just space. Yeah. Space has been for me, for sure, a multiplier of this life and the opportunities.
Yeah. If I can say, for me is again science and space, and is the courage that you get out of this adventure. Mm-hmm. A different sense of belonging. First of all, the international side. What does it mean I am an Italian? This is also, you ask your questions. But on this global side, you know, there is a sentence that I love from Thomas Eliot, which says, Pumfrock, I don't know if you know this poem, where he says, do I dare to disturb the universe? And for me, this is really how my own self changed through this adventure, meaning this sense of daring, because actually, no one cares about if you are not doing something, while if you do something, then there can be a difference. And again, this sense of belonging to something big, much bigger than you, and the fact that you are an instant gave me this, I would say, this inconscience, this sometimes this courage, not to bother about what the other thing, not to bother. And this is an important message if we want to relate also to girls and women, because we know that actually there is an anxiety that comes up from with respect to scientific subject, mathematics, and there is a very nice story from Brian Greene, which is a very famous astrophysicist, and he wrote the Elegant Universe. and explaining and actually wondering why in women you have this form of you don't want to look stupid, you don't want to ask questions. And it tells the story that he goes to a primary school, kids 5, 6 years old, and ask everyone to draw something. And there is this little girl, very focused, drawing. So he approaches her and say, "What are you drawing?" And she says, "I'm drawing the face of God." The face of God, but no one knows the face of God. Oh, in a minute they will. So, and this sense of exactly going back to this sense of, I don't care what the other think, it's a moment I have to go, and this will I mean, brings so much to me, and should not be stopped.
I love it. I think we have one question. Is it there? And then I think we'll have to do these two and then finish, I'm afraid. But I think we have one over here.
Hopefully it can be quick. So my daughter wants to be the first woman on the moon because she's 6, and she says, well, why shouldn't I be?
She's the exact the age. Yes.
She's the face of God, right?
Yes. Keep this. Yes.
So what's the one thing that you think I can do to support her in that?
Yeah. Okay, first of all, and then I leave Claudie to answer. I also have a girl now. She's older than this, but you know, we know from studies that girls don't apply to positions because if they don't match with the 100 requirements, they don't go. While men look at the first row, the last row, and say, let's go. This sense actually, it's a perfect question after what I said. There should be a pleasure in going forward. There should be a pleasure in daring. It's something that you don't in any way discourage, even if it goes to a failure. So the sense of failure should change. You know that when I was in the US, actually after the Columbia accident, the motto from NASA was failure is not an option. Today the motto of NASA is fail early, fail smart. So the value of failing, which doesn't mean that you have lost, you are not losing, is just something that will bring new things and new strength. And if you go through this sense of failure as being part of a path, I'm sure she will be more daring, and she will get ready to take these bold steps without thinking. When I say don't take a no for an answer, without thinking, this is not for. I'm sure there will be thousands. Why me? The example of Claudie in this sense is very important. But the thing is, there should be 1,000. So could be me, and so work on this sense of what is success and what is failing. Am I lovable? Am I capable? Which for girls is very strong. Sometimes they want to be lovable, and then you pass the message you are lovable if you're capable. So be sure that these are different things, and then you get the strength to go for that.
Just I would add that what's important for me is more the journey, I would say, of discovery than the goal and the objective. It's important to have a goal, and if you can keep the dream alive for her, that's perfect. But also explaining that through her, the journey, there will be pleasure, discovery, with a curiosity, and she will gain and gain and gain a lot. If the goal is really very, very ambitious, we cannot promise to get to the goal. But the journey is a wonderful path.
And then our final question.
A lot of pressure. You mentioned that space is not like, hey, I want to go to space next week, so let's kind of plan.
Not yet.
Not yet.
Elon Musk, basically.
And being an astronaut is perhaps a decade or multi-decade kind of ambition. So throughout kind of these very long journeys, how do you kind of pick yourself up when you go, oh my God, I just this week it wasn't as good as last week. How do you pick yourself up over a very, very long time period?
I would say that I had a lot of things, new things. That's why I explain that as a journey. So I was a medical doctor. I engaged in this PhD, so that means discovering working in a laboratory, and then discovering the way to cooperate with different partners, and then arriving in Star City, as I said at the very beginning, it's a shift in between the Soviet Union and so discovering this military environment and the blackboard, the black, in order to get my first lesson in Russian, in order to make the design of, I don't know, a certain element. And then a few years after that, coming here, the American, for example, with the Shuttle Mir program. So that means keeping interested with this mix of culture. I said also that training with space tourists during. So every time there was something new to discover, to learn. And that's why the journey is something really fantastic. Also this adventure. So for sure, I was eager to be on the day of the launch on the launch pad in Baikonur. But I really enjoyed the 16 years of my career. And I enjoyed after that the second life and the third life and the fourth life. That's the one I am now. And that's...
And I wish we had time to ask you about them all, particularly the political. I'm particularly curious about that. I think, thank you so much, both of you. This is...
Maybe on the political field.
Yes.
No, just in the first part, as a medical doctor, because I was bright in my studies, so no problem coming in. And with the astronaut, also it was relatively easy, I would say, for me. It was interesting. But with politics, I discovered something that I was convinced before entering in politics that when there is a will, there is a way. And I discovered it's not always like that.
Thank you both so much for joining us. It's been amazing.